Hey everyone, welcome to episode 101 of Lionheart Radio with your host, Rick Alexander. Today I'm speaking with Teal Stetson Lee. She's a pro mountain biker and she's actually one of the first pro athletes to be sponsored by a marijuana company. And Teal piqued my interest. I read an article about her and about the pervasiveness in marijuana in sport and whether it should be allowed or not. And of course, that's a hot topic now as we're kind of on the brink of ending prohibition in the United States. Of course, not federally, but legally in quite a few states, and quite a few others are poised to do so very soon. And so I think it's something that's rapidly approaching. It is an issue within fitness that I think is going to only become more and more prevalent as we go on. And I think we're better off figuring out how we feel about these things before the narrative in the conversation is dictated by opinions that we don't agree with. I think it's important to figure out how we feel about a certain thing, and then we're able to weigh in at least knowledgeably. And so Teal has a really cool point of view on marijuana use and on whether or not it is beneficial. I actually happen to agree quite a bit with her viewpoint on marijuana use, and I think that will become evident as the podcast goes on. As a quick disclaimer, Teal was getting her oil changed in her car, and so we're doing this interview from an oil changing service office, I guess. And so there are a few interruptions, and I actually am just going to skip the very beginning part where we had to have her move into a different room to make it a little bit quieter. I'm going to skip all of that, and we'll go right into the conversation with Teal Stetson Lee on Lionheart Radio. Heard a little bit of background noise right now. Teal is getting her oil changed and has decided to squeeze us into the middle, in which for we are grateful. So thanks for that.
I appreciate you accommodating me.
Anytime. So before we had that little move, so you were talking about doing cyclocross as a way of training. So cyclocross, for people that don't know, it's a lot of really high intensity effort, and it's a lot of getting off the bike and running with the bike and getting back on the bike. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep, that's a good explanation. It's kind of like it's an obstacle course, essentially. That's usually 1 mile to 2 miles in distance that you ride a loop of, and there'll be technical hills that you have to hop off your bike, shoulder your bike to run up them, stairs, barriers, those types of things. So it is very versatile. It's a very diverse discipline. And you know, I'm saying that cyclocross and enduro go hand in hand. Well, I'll tell you that my most recent enduro race was in Colombia just a week and a half ago, and it was insanely muddy. So there was a fair amount of running with our bicycles, and my cyclocross skills absolutely came into play. And I felt like I had a huge edge on some of my competition just because I was used to running in mud with a bicycle.
Right. So I've always been curious about this. How do you train for cyclocross? Are you sprinting with a bike and training? Or are you just doing the course? How do you set that up?
Yes. So training for cyclocross also involves a lot of intervals, and I'll go out and kind of make my own courses and play around with doing quick accelerations out of corners, dismounts, and remounts. Dismounts and remounts are where you can make up a significant amount of time if you can do those well. But the ultimate training for cyclocross racing is cyclocross racing. Unlike other disciplines of cycling where you can put in time outside of that competitive world to gain that edge, with cyclocross, it's very unique because there's hardly anything that simulates that type of intensity with those obstacles. So the racing, oftentimes the first couple of races of the season, you feel a little bit rusty and kind of blown out when you finish the race, but then all of a sudden that high intensity training kicks into your system, and once you have that under your belt, that's a great platform for the rest of the season.
I'd imagine, just looking at it from the outside, it seems like there's a huge technical aspect as well, just because getting off your bike, on your bike, like those transitions, I would imagine would cost you time over the long run if you're not proficient at them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that technical skill is really crucial. And then in conjunction with that, you also have diverse conditions, because cyclocross happens during the fall and winter when you're experiencing inclement weather, mud, snow, rain, you name it. There's never a cyclocross race that gets canceled due to weather.
Right.
So that keeps you on your toes also. And being able to just, pick up time anywhere you can on a course, cornering really fast, picking good lines, which is obviously a huge part of enduro racing as well. That adds up like pennies that you put in your pocket over the course of a race. And by the end of the race, if you have a whole $1, you're going to be way ahead of everybody else.
Right. So do you do any cross training for this kind of a thing at all?
I do. I go to the gym. I go to the gym 3 times a week, and I have a trainer there that ramps up my lifting during the course of the season, depending what I'm training for. And then I also do quite a bit of running. Running is just a lot of bang for your buck. You can put in a short run, 15 minutes to half an hour, and throw a few intervals in there, and you get really good quality, high intensity. So that's a huge part of what I do also. And then, just general playing, going outside, hiking in the mountains, doing lots of fun bike rides with friends, things that keep me mentally fresh are absolutely paramount. Sometimes we talk about the physical training more than the mental training. But for me, the mental training is about resting and taking care of myself, and less is more. At this point in my career, less is more.
Yeah. So, yeah, because it seems like because you have 2 kind of different seasons, it would be hard to stay hungry because you're not peaking for one big season. You're kind of like trying to stay pretty fit all year long, which seems like it would be a lot more difficult.
Yes, it is. It is. And in the past, I took a hiatus from cyclocross for 3 years. And so I didn't have that same fitness I had to carry all the way through. This last year I got back into it, and it was challenging because I had put in a full season of racing and traveling with Enduro. And then to kind of maintain that spark going into cyclocross season, I had to be pretty strategic about taking big breaks all throughout the season so that by the time nationals rolled around, I was still sharp and excited, just excited to ride my bike. That's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah. It seems like one thing that's cool, it seems like all of the mountain athletes that we have on here, they have a different approach to life. Like a lot of their life is play. It seems like, whereas a lot of other athletes, like, especially you talk to like the CrossFit crowd, like you're 6 hours in a gym, daily just because you're working on your weaknesses, and there's so many different disciplines that take place inside of those 4 walls. And so when they do get out to like swim, it's like they're swimming time trials, and it's a very repetitive thing. And when I talk to you guys, you're like, yeah, but like mostly I'm just trying to get out there to go play.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is an interesting difference. And that's something I've certainly noticed over the course of my career talking with different athletes. And a lot of it has to do with how you're programmed and what you need and the way that you do athletics for yourself. And there's no right way to do it. It's very individual. It's very different for everybody.
Sure.
For myself personally, I am not a kind of stereotypical type A athlete. As a professional athlete, I have to play. That's the only reason why I'm still doing what I'm doing.
Right.
I have that desire to get out and go into the mountains and go into the woods and just have a great time where I'm not thinking about what kind of mileage I'm putting in or how hard my, efforts are or what my heart rate is. In fact, I lost my Garmin 2 years ago in a crash in an Enduro race up in Whistler. And I took it as a sign that I wasn't supposed to be looking at numbers anymore.
So you just never got a new one?
It. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of been the kind of Zen frontier in my own career. And I would say that it served me really well. Overall, I probably am a better athlete, a stronger athlete, a more motivated athlete, and I win more races now that I have a more relaxed approach.
So when you started out, were you a lot more regimented when you were like, let's say maybe trying to turn pro? And then as you got into it, you kind of figured out what you needed?
Yes, I was. And when I started out, I was a cross-country racer and a cyclocross racer, and those are more heavily endurance-based sports, especially cross-country. And to be a top performer in cross-country riding, you have to put in volume, and you have to be pretty on it with power or heart rate or different tools that you use for that training. I mean, I'd say you have to do that for enduro racing as well, but there's just a little bit of a different flavor to the downhill stage racing approach, which are shorter time segments versus an hour and a half to 2 hour cross country race where you're going out there and hammering with a mass start against a huge group of people. And yeah, so I put in a lot of mileage and a lot of more regimented training early on. And now that is my base that I get to lean on.
Right, sure. So,
excuse me.
No worries. So it seems like when you're with the Enduro, so it's a downhill race, but then you have to get back up to the next stage. Is there a certain time limit so you can't like totally like take the chairlift? You can't totally like hang out?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it depends on what kind of Enduro series you're racing. Some of the domestic series are a bit more relaxed. But generally speaking, all of them, there is a time limit for that transition or that liaison period. At the World Enduro race level, Enduro World Series, those are tight generally, and you really have to haul after you finish. You don't have much time to lollygag and hang out with friends and, just, talk about whatever you just went through. Usually it's like, okay, we'll talk about it, but we got to make sure that we're getting up to the next stage. So fitness really does come into play in Enduro as well. I think when Enduro was fresh as a discipline, people kind of made fun of it a little bit. They're like, oh yeah, this is what all the retired cross-country racers who just want to ride downhill are doing this, or the retired downhill racers when they're looking for their next frontier. This is just the easy thing to pick up. But Enduro racing is probably the hardest cycling discipline I've ever done, because you have to be so on your game with your technical ability, and you're riding dangerous stuff where the consequences are pretty significant if you're not sharp, and fitness plays into that. You have to feel like you can go out there and put down an effort and still keep it clean, and then be able to last for 5 to 6 hours of pedaling to get between stages, depending how long you're going.
Yeah. So what was it about Enduro that drew you over to it?
Well, I realized that with cross-country racing, I ultimately was always just riding up to ride down. That I enjoyed the descents more than the climbs.
Sure.
And so that was a pretty key indicator for me that maybe Enduro would be the magical fit.
Right.
But I also always loved the earning of my descent, which is the reason why I never was interested in converting to downhill racing, because then you're only racing, a 3-minute single stage, and oftentimes you're riding a chairlift to the top. And I loved the idea of having to pedal and have that descent just taste that much sweeter because of the effort I put in on the front end.
Yeah. For all of you guys that are listening, I know you can relate, because either you or your best friend started out in CrossFit and then switched to Olympic weightlifting because you realized that was the only part of the workout you liked. So you're like, why am I doing all this cardio? And I can just go straight to the part I like. Exactly.
Very similar. Right. That's a good comparison.
When you were a kid, like if you could think back and think of, 15-year-old Teal or 10-year-old Teal, did you think that you would be a pro mountain biker or a pro mountain athlete even?
Not necessarily. Not on the cycling side of things. I actually didn't start riding bikes until college. So mountain biking wasn't even on my radar as a kid. But I was a competitive cross-country ski racer all through middle school and high school. I actually went to 3 junior Olympics for cross-country ski racing. And I had some ideas about wanting to pursue that at an Olympic level. But by my senior year of high school, I actually got totally burned out on cross-country skiing and quit it completely and joined theater, and it was the best decision of my life.
Really?
Yep.
That seems like a challenge. Like when you see somebody that's made it to like the ultimate, the elitist level of that sport, not only did they put in the hours, but they survived the burnout, and that seems like the hardest part.
Yes, it really is, and I think that's one of the things I'm always very cautionary about when I look at kids who are up-and-comers in any sport. If they're being pushed too hard, either by themselves or by external pressures like parents or coaches who are super gung-ho, maintaining that passion over the course of a career lifetime is a challenge. So I think it's important that there's some play introduced, especially in those early stages, that allow somebody, especially a kid, to recognize the fun of what they're doing, to help, motivate them to continue down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you picked up a mountain bike. I think I read you were 20 years old when you started biking, like racing.
That's correct. Yes.
And so what was that transition like? And then like, what was it like starting? Did you think like, oh, this is something I'm going to love and try to go pro at? Or like, what was that whole thing like?
Yeah, so I joined the Fort Lewis cycling team in college my second year because one of my good friends from high school, she was also going to Fort Lewis, and she had raced mountain bikes previously when she was younger in high school. And she said, I think this is something you'd really like. I think it's something you'd be really good at. Let's join the team together. And so on a whim, I was like, sure, why not? I'm a mountain kid. I think I could get into this.
Right.
And then I won my first collegiate race, and I was hooked. I was like, oh, well, maybe I do maybe there is something here.
You won the very first race you ever did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Sure. No.
And so, yeah, I mean, that was totally an addictive feeling right out of the gate. But more than that, it was also just the community that surrounded mountain biking that brought me in. And, after 3 years of competing in college, I started thinking a little more seriously about whether or not I wanted to pursue it as a pro. And then I won the collegiate national championship in cyclocross my last year of college, and that was a stepping stone onto a pro team. I got picked up immediately after that. And so then it was kind of like no looking back, whether it had been a dream of mine or not, the opportunity was on my plate.
Right. So after college, you're like 9 to 5 pro athlete, trying to figure out what I should do.
Yeah, pretty much. But I did juggle another job for the first couple years of my career because, believe it or not, pro cyclists don't exactly make a ton of money.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked for AmeriCorps for 2 years for a tobacco prevention organization doing policy work while I was also training full-time as a professional cyclocross racer.
Interesting. So when we had Sonia Looney on the show, and pro endurance mountain bike racer, or ultra endurance, I guess, she talked about this idea that she was basically like a media distribution center. Like, although she was a pro mountain biker, she basically had to have her personal brand, and constantly she was like an entrepreneur as well. Do you find yourself in that role now, or are you at the point where biking is really taking over? It is the lifestyle.
Yeah, well, I've kind of dabbled across the board with some variety in that capacity. And what I mean by that is when I got picked up by Cal Giant, which was the first pro cyclocross team I rode for, I was on a team. So I was folded into kind of their media platform for getting my start. But I was learning the ropes as to how to promote myself in that context. And then I joined the Luna Pro team, which is a much bigger mountain bike and cyclocross team. And they also had a really great promotional platform. And I learned a ton about how to craft my own brand and build it collaboratively with the brand of the team. And we had a lot of big name sponsors. I mean, Luna is Cliff Bar. So there was a great amount of backing behind the team and support for all of us as athletes to do that. But after I left Luna, I joined Scott, and I still ride Scott bikes, and that was more of a privateer scenario. So in that context, I was tasked more with being that media house that Sonia Looney describes, of being able to promote myself and my own brand in conjunction with the brands that support me. And I'm still in that position, but it's like that is just one job of several that I currently do, because even being in that position, it's still hard to earn a living and make enough money to survive doing that solely. Plus, it can be extremely exploitive, and there can be some difficult territory to navigate for having that position.
So what year was it when you got into mountain bike racing?
I'm sorry, ask me that one more time.
What year was it when you got into mountain bike racing?
I got into mountain bike racing in 2007.
Okay. So it was kind of after the really big time for mountain biking, which was in the 90s. But
That's right.
I'm wondering if, because I used to race when I was 14, 15 years old, and I just remember it being so big, but that was like 1998 or some bullshit like that.
Yeah.
But do you feel like it's trending back up, or where do you feel like the growth of the sport is now?
Yes, I do feel that it is trending back up slowly. It kind of went to a dark place in even just the last couple of years. Certainly the 90s were the heyday. Now I would say that the trend of mountain biking is anything that's relatable. So enduro racing has been growing on a global scale because it has this idea of you can go out and ride with your friends. It's very social. And even though on the stages you're racing against the clock and it's a time trial, you get to hang out with your friends again at the bottom and ride all the transitions together. So there's a relatability to that discipline. And I would say that relatability theme is something that crosses the board with mountain biking for what's making it popular. Is any time that companies can create a product that has some kind of a fun social relatability around it, or races that involve a lot more collaboration and socializing, that's really what's selling, because that's what makes people feel like, hey, I could do that too. Whereas World Cup mountain bike racing, which is kind of where the heyday was at in the 90s, it's not relatable. I mean, it's still big in Europe because Europe has this die-hard bike culture over there that's deeply ingrained. But in the United States, I would say that is definitely not a popular discipline for people because, I mean, what's relatable about World Cup cross-country mountain bike racing?
Right.
You don't watch that and go, wow, that looks fun. I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
I mean,
I really want to suffer up that Alp.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So also, too, I think that probably helps out with the community aspect of it. It's like if the spectator has done it before, like I know that's a big thing with the ultra community, the ultra marathon community, and that's kind of what I've been into lately, is like everybody's suffered out there before, and so they've done it, so they have an idea of what it's like. So when you come into an aid station, like the community is just crazy because everybody wants to help because they know what it's like to kind of do it. And so if it's got that relatability factor, I think that's what makes it really cool.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that community that gets built that you're describing, I mean, that's what makes the experience so worthwhile. You know, you walk away from an event like that and you're like, wow, everybody had my back. You know, even though I was suffering like a dog, we were all in it together.
Right. Do you have any habits or like superstitions that you stick to on race day, or any habits that you think have led to your success?
Let's see. Not really. Not anymore. I feel like when I was younger, starting out, I probably had some strange superstitions, but I can't think of any. There's none that come to mind right now. Other than just, you know, I focus a lot on just being centered and protecting myself from other people's anxious energies. You know, race environments are strange because everybody is insecure and everyone's walking around feeling nervous and unsure of themselves, and so I take time to stay away from people and shield myself from their anxieties and just kind of focus on getting into my own zone. Yeah, I guess if there was a habit that I would describe, that would be it.
So that's an interesting thing, because I think no matter what your sport is, it's super easy to get really revved up from people around you. And so what does that look like for you? How do you like actively protect your energy, I guess?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you do get revved up with other people. I mean, I would just say that, you know, I try to limit my conversations that I have before I drop in for a stage. You know, a lot of people will sit around and socialize, and I might do a little bit of that, but then I very consciously try to create space from other people so that I can just have my own energy to deal with and kind of figure out where I'm at and get centered and grounded. Yeah, I mean, it's challenging because you are in a social environment in most competitive environments, and so you're around other people, but it also depends on your sensitivity levels. Like, I know I absorb other people's energy really dramatically, so for me, I have to make sure I get that space and that distance. So in some respects, I think, you know, enduro racing, which is a time trial, I don't have to deal with as many people's energy because I'm not in a mass start environment any longer. It's always a readjusting process when I get back to cyclocross, which is a mass start.
Right. Yeah, I think the hardest part of enduro seems like this, ability to go parasympathetic when you're in the transition phase and you're trying to like recover. I'm sure you're trying to get your heart rate back down, and probably just like conversing with other people helps that. But then you have to like get like back to peak, like ready to go, within that next like few minutes, and then try to dial it all the way back down and then do it again over and over.
Yes.
That seems exhausting.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, it is exhausting. I mean, it's mentally and physically exhausting. I think that one thing I've learned over the last 4 years of racing enduro almost exclusively has been that instead of freaking out in those first couple minutes dropping into a new stage and being like, I need to be going full on anaerobic as hard as I can go, I'm back in it, it's just to take a few minutes to settle in and allow myself to adjust to that ramped up intensity that I'm putting my body through again, and focus on just riding clean and smooth. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. That's always going through my head. And then, I ramp it up because I have the training under my belt to rely on. So I know I'll get back into that intensity, but it's not necessarily going to click immediately out of the gate. And that's okay. As long as I'm riding smooth and I'm not making mistakes, I'm going fast.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Do you listen to music while you ride?
I do when I'm training on the road. I don't listen to music when I'm riding mountain bikes because I like to be able to hear the sounds of my bike and make sure that everything is functioning.
Oh, okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So pre-show, we started talking about like how you came across my radar and why I wanted to have you on Lionheart Radio. So one of my buddies sent me an article and I got reading it, and basically it was about the introduction of marijuana to sport and whether that's a good thing or not. And so I definitely have my opinions and I want to express them, but I want to see how... And you are one of the first you are the first sponsored mountain biker by a marijuana company. How has that introduction been? How have people perceived it?
I would say 99% of the feedback has been positive, which is interesting. I'm not sure that if you had asked me prior to jumping on board with this sponsor, if I would have guessed that. But what I've found is that people are really receptive to the conversation around cannabis products and how it comes into play in sport and how it already is in play in sport, especially extreme sports on the recreational side. A lot of people are already marijuana users. So this kind of brings the conversation to light for them. And then on the medicinal side, and that's the side I'm most keen on and focused on for recovery purposes, cannabis products absolutely have a place in sport. They're less harmful than even taking ibuprofen repeatedly. I mean, most athletes have go-to medications for anti-inflammation, and using something that's a safer alternative that has less consequences over time, or pain recovery from injuries instead of taking opioids. I mean, cannabis has all types of has a place, I should say, in the sports world. All of those things.
Yeah, that's been one of my biggest arguments. So when I got into ultramarathon running about 2 years ago, I'm in the military, so I obviously cannot smoke weed. But one of the things that like really got to me was this fact that like I would finish these races and I would be completely wrecked. And your adrenaline's been spiked so many times and you've been up for days and you like really can't sleep and you're in a ton of pain. So your only option is to take a shitload of Advil PM, and you can't eat either. And so like just your only option is beat the hell out of your liver and hope you can get some sleep. When it's like, so that's the better option than smoking, eating a bunch of really good food, and then just sleeping for 12 hours. Like, how is that a better option?
I completely agree with you. And I mean, and there's a lot of studies out there now about how those, mild over-the-counter pain medications, how those do affect your body over time. And yeah, it's a quick fix. Easy, pop a pill, get your muscles to relax. Finally, you can get some sleep. But long term, I mean, it's brutal. And what we do to our bodies as athletes is already pretty brutal. So if you're adding another layer of like your medication on top of that, breaking your body down, that's really detrimental. So having safer alternatives out there is absolutely imperative. But there's a reason why the safer alternatives have been so stigmatized and have been taboo for so long, because certainly they're a threat to a lot of the medications that people default to.
Yeah, and that seems like a common argument among the crowd that is for legalization, is that they think that it's obviously taking money away from a big pharma.
Yes, I mean, it is. I mean, because the more research that's being done on cannabis, and thank goodness there's some, there's this legal platform in a variety of states now so that research can be conducted. And I'm not saying that we have all the answers, and I'm not saying that we know 100% all of the side effects either. But thank goodness we're able to start doing some research to figure that out now. And a lot of the research, the positive research that's coming out, is indicating that CBDs, which is one of the key cannabinoids that's been studied for medicinal purposes, and a variety of other cannabinoids, have extreme value on the medicinal side for not only anti-inflammation and pain medication, but for, deeper issues like treating seizures, treating cancer, treating ailments that are really significant, that people have had all different types of medication that they've been using to regulate. So there's a lot of value. It's kind of like this wonder plant that can fix a lot of issues that we currently have a huge variety of medication to address.
Right. Do you see, for that reason, because it does seem like it's going to be legalized at some point here in the next probably decade, but like federally, do you see big pharma getting involved in this? Do you see them trying to just get ahead of the curve because they can't beat it? Oh,
yeah, without a doubt. I wouldn't be surprised if they're already pulling patents. I mean, the U.S. government already has patents for CBD for treating neurological injuries. Which is something that people don't necessarily know, that the U.S. government is already figuring out ways of owning patents for the rights to treat specific neurological injuries with CBD. I mean, fascinating, because CBD is a Schedule I drug in conjunction with cannabis,
right,
on a federal level. But yeah, I would not be surprised if Big Pharma is already pulling permits, pulling patents, whatever it takes to get their hands in it. It's a big industry. It's a money-making industry, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And they probably see dollar signs.
Yeah, right, I'm sure. And once, it seems like once that wave starts crashing, like they're just going to get ahead of it, it seems like. So you keep talking about CBD. For the listeners, for people that aren't aware of what that is, it's the non-psychoactive component of marijuana. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, non-psychoactive component, so you can actually take CBD products. There are some CBD products now that are available even at natural food stores because they don't have the psychoactive THC cannabinoid, and in their pure form, they're still very potent and valuable for treating different ailments. But I will tell you that, generally speaking, CBD paired with THC, even if it's in a very, very small percentage, like 0.03%, you can find products, tinctures with that low of a percentage, is more effective because THC is fat soluble. So it allows for CBDs to actually penetrate your cells and be utilized by the body better.
And what about to the degree that it hurts performance? Or are you not smoking it? Or what does that look like? Because you're still a cardio-based athlete.
Totally. Yeah, my preference is not to smoke weed. And taking it in, inhaling it definitely affects my lungs for sure. So that's not my preference. I will on occasion. Mm-hmm. But for me, I prefer edibles as my number one go-to. Balms. I use a lot of topical cannabis products, and then the tinctures. You can get oil tinctures that you put under your tongue that are really effective. So there's a lot of options now for products that exist out there. I mean, you can get pills, you can get lozenges, you can get it in a drinkable form. There's a lot of options, and a lot of it is about figuring out what products work well for you and what your body responds well to. I mean, I even have a cannabis bath salts that I use when I take Epsom salt baths, and that is the best product ever. Wow. I just love that. After I do a really big race or a really big training day, I'll take an Epsom salt bath with the cannabis salts, and it's like, it just rejuvenates my entire body. I wake up the next day feeling like I'm fresh as a daisy. Like
Right.
I never did anything.
You better keep that away from Florida. They heard bath salts and weed. They're coming in hot.
Seriously.
So when what are the topical uses, or is that the topical uses that you're talking about?
So some of the topical creams that I use are balms that are cannabis mixed with arnica. So if you're used to using arnica oil or arnica salves, it's very similar, but the cannabis in there has a similar effect, kind of amplifies that effect. Anti-inflammation, dealing with sore muscles, bruises, shallow injuries, just helps regeneration of that area quicker.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about the fact that the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, USADA, WADA, all these things that kind of regulate sport, certainly the bigger sports, have marijuana as being you're unable to smoke it if you compete in any sports that are regulated by them.
Yes.
Is your sport not? And like what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm hoping at some point to be able to have some dialogues with those regulatory bodies, because I think these conversations need to be had. It's like this is here now, so we can just bury our head in the sand and pretend it's not, or we can actually have some constructive conversations. That's kind of my goal, is to go in that direction. But in the short term, cyclocross is regulated by UCI, which is the International Cycling Governing Body. And so for cyclocross season, I won't use any cannabis products that have THC in them. That would put me on that radar. CBD was actually just approved as of 2018 by USADA or by WADA. And so now that's no longer on the banned substance list. So using pure CBD products don't put athletes at risk with those regulations. But anything with THC, there's still a minimum amount of THC that you're allowed to have in your system if you go through any drug testing.
Oh,
so
gotcha.
I just steer clear of it for cyclocross. For enduro racing, enduro is not governed by any of those bodies. The Enduro World Series has a couple races that this year, for the first time, I believe, are now UCI. So for those races, there probably will be testing and there will be some concern around that. But generally speaking, enduro is more of a rogue sport. It's kind of the rebel mountain bike discipline.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have the same regulations that apply.
So for people that are interested in possibly like experimenting with and using marijuana as a pseudo-ergogenic aid, but also as to just aid in recovery, like what is the process, or what do you recommend for people to even begin using something like this?
I would highly recommend talking to somebody who's educated about it. If you're in a state where there's dispensaries, most dispensaries have a lot of professionals that work there. That's been my experience living in Nevada, and I'm from Colorado originally, and actually left Colorado right after the legalization went through. So I don't know a ton about the Colorado dispensaries, but I would say on average, most dispensaries have people there who are extremely knowledgeable about all of the different products that they're selling. And walking in and saying, I'm an athlete and I've learned the value of CBDs and I want to experiment with some products. What do you recommend for me? Because there's all different types of strains of cannabis, and some strains are higher in THC, some are higher in CBDs. There's certain strains that are almost pure CBD with a very minimal amount of THC. Like they won't necessarily give you a psychoactive effect at all, but they're extremely valuable for recovery. So just asking about that, what kind of strains do you have? What's high in CBD? What do you recommend as an athlete? Because they're used to offering products to people that are coming in for all different purposes. So I think that would be the best starting point.
Yeah, that strain conversation it's really interesting how advanced potheads have gotten in the last few years. 'Cause like,
oh my gosh,
yeah.
It is unbelievable. I have learned so much about the weed industry since I've picked up this sponsorship.
I bet.
And I just can't believe the minds that are behind some of these these strains and grows and the products that are being produced.
Right.
It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. Last time I was in San Diego, I saw this app, and like basically you just picked what you wanted to be on the app. Like, oh, you want to be happy? You want to be tired? You want to be like,
yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, there's strains out there that are appetite suppressants,
right,
instead of appetite inducing, which I never would have thought that when I think about weed. That is the exact opposite that I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, strains that are really great for sleeping, strains that are really great for getting things done. There's a strain that Kind produces, my sponsor, called MTF, and they call it the Workhorse Strain. When you smoke that or ingest it, it makes you crazy motivated, and you'll go and like reorganize your entire closet and clean your house from top to bottom, and probably go for a run and maybe get a ride in. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And I mean, it's wild. They definitely kind of promote that as their workhorse strain. But speaking on that subject, I don't train using cannabis, and I don't race using cannabis. That for me is a personal preference. I use them, for those products, for recovery or in my downtime, separate from my my riding and training, because for me it makes me I don't feel as sharp. I don't feel as focused. But it's a personal preference thing. I have lots of friends who are recreational users, and they'll use it when they ride, and they love it. It makes them super stoked on whatever they're doing. So
yeah, I've always been interested in that, people that can smoke and then work out. I'm like, you're a freak.
Yeah, I know. I know, that's how I feel too.
Right.
That's how I feel too.
Yeah. So is that, in your opinion, for an athlete, is that probably the most beneficial area to begin using it is in your recovery?
Yes, I would say so. But also, to be totally honest, I think that it has some great psychological benefits too, going back to our earlier conversation about physical training versus mental training. Well, The same thing goes with physical recovery versus mental recovery. I mean, there's a lot of pressure and anxiety that's involved in being a competitive athlete. There's a whole bunch of crazy psychology that we have to deal with. Usually, we're in our own way. We can be our own worst enemy.
Sure.
So being able to have a product that helps us to kind of let go and relax and think about the world in a different way, see it through a different lens, I think is hugely valuable. And I think it's something that can sometimes be undervalued for athletes because it's not focused on enough. How do you find your center? How do you live a balanced life? How do you get out and play or make time for family in conjunction with all the crazy stuff that you're doing? How do you get out of your own head so that you can let go and be in a different mind space? So I would say that, cannabis certainly has value in that realm as well.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. All right, cool. So the Lionheart Kicker is a final question, and we ask every guest, and it's based on advice. So if you could give blanket advice, and we're guaranteed everybody in the world would hear it, and it would be translated to every language, and it can be on life, athletics, weed, whatever you want. You could have a platform for a minute, and you could tell somebody or tell everybody something. What would you tell people?
I would tell people that sometimes we think that other people in the world have things figured out better than we do. And the truth is, the big secret is that nobody knows what they're doing.
Everybody's faking it.
Everybody's faking it. And if you recognize that, it gives you this huge amount of personal power, because all of a sudden you realize that it's an equal playing field. And you can go out in the world and take on any challenge, any new opportunity, whether it's in life, athletics, whatever it is, and just know that you have the chance to be just as much of an expert as anybody else.
Yeah.
So don't get intimidated by other people who act like they know what they're doing, because they don't. We're all just shooting from the hip, feeling our way in the dark.
Right. No, I love that, especially now because, social media has taken that problem and put it on steroids, right? Because now everybody looks like they have it all put together, and every relationship is perfect, and everybody has good skin. And you're like,
totally. Totally. Yeah, and I mean, it's really horrible because it totally plays on our insecurities and on our human lust after comparison. We're always needing to compare ourselves and feel like we have a leg up on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is that we all have a leg up on each other if we recognize that, if we recognize that we have the ability to do anything, to be anything, and that nobody out there really knows any better than we do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Is that a mantra that you've always lived by?
I think I have, but I don't think I had as much clarity around it until probably just the last 3 to 4 years. I've taken on some big professional challenges in my professional life, separate from cycling, and then also in my cycling world. And I've, jumped into things that were brand new and, built things from the ground up and been very successful and realized that, oh, wow, I just, kind of jumped in, took the risk, and I figured it out. And I don't know that I'm necessarily smarter or stronger than anyone else, but it was the risk-taking part that allowed those doors to open and just gave me that insight of, hey, I can do this too. We all can.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think it's cool that you're the first person, I think, so you're our 99th guest, and you're the first person to ever, really vocalize it. But that's, one thing I've noticed in this show. I've gotten to interview all these pro athletes and entrepreneurs and thought leaders, and the one thing the theme, I would say, if you could pull a thread through all of them, is that they literally just had an idea and then they just did it. They nobody gave them permission. Nobody was like, "Oh, you are perfect to do this." It was like, "No, I think I could do that," and then they went and did it. And they just have that mindset. So thank you for vocalizing that for people.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think that is something that athletes often share in common as an innate component of who we are. But just, a reminder to everybody that you can take that and apply that to life.
Yeah.
That concept it's so powerful. It's so powerful. When you apply that, you're totally unstoppable.
Yeah, I agree. And that's cool because it's athletes that are constantly teaching us what humans are capable of. They're constantly redefining what we think is oh shit, humans are possible? Humans are capable of doing that? That's possible? And
yes.
So it's perfect.
Yes. That's right. That's right.
So
awesome.
For people that are listening to this and they want to follow along with your journey and support what you're doing, where's the best place for them to do that?
So I have a few different social media sites that are my full name. So my name is Teal Stetson Lee. That's TealStetsonLee. You can find me under that name on Instagram or Facebook, or tealstetsonlee.com is my website, which hopefully I'll update in the next couple of weeks, and you'll have something fresh to check out.
All right, perfect. And we'll link all of those up in the show notes, so you guys can check that out, lionheartrad.io, and then we will have all of her stuff linked up. Teal, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Great conversation. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track in delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or would like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland is the